The strange behavior of Keola. Jolene Jonas had always considered herself a practical woman. When she and Ricky first decided to start a family, it seemed like the logical next step in their life together. They had been through so much already, navigating the complexities of their early relationship, moving in together, and building a stable foundation. So, when Jolene found out she was pregnant, it was a moment of pure happiness. For the first time, everything felt like it was falling into place. But something wasn't quite right. From the very beginning, there had been an undercurrent of unease that Jolene couldn't quite explain. It started small, a few oddities that she tried to dismiss. Keola, their horse, would act strangely whenever she was near him. Keola had always been a calm and affectionate animal, ever since they'd brought him home. He was the kind of horse who would nuzzle up to you, gently resting his head on your shoulder, showing affection with a quiet, reassuring demeanor. But as soon as Jolene's pregnancy became apparent, Keola's behavior began to shift. At first, it was subtle. He would seem to hover around her, his eyes fixed on her stomach, as if he were observing her every movement. Jolene laughed it off, thinking that maybe the pregnancy hormones were affecting her more than she realized. But then, one day, as she was brushing Keola's coat, he leaned in and gave her belly a gentle lick, his eyes full of curiosity. It was strange, sure, but Jolene figured it was just Keola's way of showing interest in the new change in her body. But the behavior didn't stop there. Over the next few days, Keola became increasingly possessive of Jolene. Whenever she would walk around the barn or the property, Keola would follow her every step, refusing to let her out of his sight. He'd nudge her with his muzzle, his body pressing up against her in a way that felt almost protective. Jolene found it endearing at first, thinking it was just his way of showing affection, but as the days passed, the behavior became more intense, even unnerving. It wasn't long before Keola started refusing to let Jolene walk without his constant presence. He would stand in her way, blocking her path, almost as if he were preventing her from leaving the barn. At first, Jolene thought he might just be feeling clingy due to the changes around the house. After all, she and Ricky had just moved into a larger house with more land for Keola to roam. But his behavior escalated quickly, and Jolene couldn't ignore the feeling that something was off. One evening, Jolene was sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, when Keola approached her in a way that made her heart race. He didn't just nuzzle up to her or lick her belly as usual, instead, he leaned his body against her legs, refusing to move, his head resting heavily on her lap. Jolene reached down to pet him, but he didn't let her pull away. His grip on her was almost vice-like, and there was an intensity in his eyes that Jolene hadn't seen before. It was as if Keola was trying to communicate something urgent. "Keola, let me go, boy," Jolene said softly, pushing at his large frame. But Keola didn't budge. His eyes remained locked on her, and it was only when she raised her voice that he reluctantly stepped away. Jolene's heart pounded in her chest, and she couldn't help but feel a chill run down her spine. Something was wrong. That night, Jolene couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Keola's strange behavior, wondering if there was more to it than she could understand. Was the horse just reacting to her pregnancy? Or was there something else happening? Jolene had heard before that animals had a heightened sense of perception. Horses, especially, were known to be incredibly sensitive to their surroundings, and many people believed they could sense emotions, energies, and even danger that humans couldn't. But could it be possible that Keola was sensing something far deeper? Jolene tossed and turned in bed, finally waking Ricky in the early hours of the morning. He groggily rubbed his eyes as she recounted the night's events. "I'm really worried about Keola, Ricky," she said, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "He's been acting strange, like he's trying to protect me. I don't know what to make of it." Ricky sat up, his brow furrowed in concern. "You think the horse knows something we don't?" "I don't know," Jolene admitted. "But I feel like we should take him to the vet, just in case." Ricky sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "You're probably just overthinking things, Jolene. It's probably just the pregnancy. Horses can act weird sometimes. But if it'll make you feel better, I'll take him to the vet with you tomorrow." The next morning, Jolene and Ricky made their way to the local vet, Dr. Simmons, who was known for her experience with horses. They explained the situation, and Dr. Simmons examined Keola thoroughly, checking his vitals, his coat, his eyes, and his general behavior. Everything seemed normal physically, but Keola's behavior still struck her as unusual. "I don't see any signs of illness or injury, but it's possible that he's just reacting to your pregnancy. Animals can be very sensitive to changes in their environment, especially when it comes to things like hormones," Dr. Simmons suggested. "But if you're really concerned, we can run some tests to make sure everything's okay." Jolene wasn't entirely convinced. Could he be sensing something dangerous? Like, I don't know, something with the baby? Dr. Simmons looked thoughtful. "I've heard of horses being able to sense subtle changes, but as for danger, I can't say. The tests will give us a better idea." After several hours at the vet, Jolene and Ricky returned home with no clear answers. Keola had been given a clean bill of health, but Jolene still couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Over the next few days, Keola's behavior only seemed to intensify. He would constantly stand in front of her, nudge her, and even try to push her away from certain parts of the property. He wouldn't let her near certain areas, particularly near the barn where he usually spent a lot of his time. Ricky began to grow frustrated. "Jolene, you're letting this horse run your life. It's just being overprotective, that's all. He's fine, and so are you." But Jolene couldn't let go of the feeling that Keola was trying to tell her something important. As she stood in the barn one afternoon, Keola trotted over to her, his eyes wide and frantic. He nudged her aside urgently, as though begging her to follow him. Jolene, now fully aware that something was off, hesitated. But her instincts told her to listen. She followed Keola across the property, her heart racing in anticipation of what she might find. Keola led her to a spot near the woods behind their house, a place she had never ventured before. The horse stopped and stood still, his head lowered, as though waiting for something. Jolene took a cautious step forward, looking around for any signs of danger, but found nothing unusual. That's when she noticed something she hadn't seen before, a small, old-fashioned locket lying in the grass. Curious, she bent down to pick it up. It was an intricately designed locket, tarnished by time and dirt. As she turned it over in her hands, Jolene realized that it was inscribed with initials RJ. Her heart skipped a beat. Could this locket be connected to Ricky's mysterious past, the one he refused to talk about? It felt like Keola had led her here for a reason, but what could it mean? The unease that had been building inside Jolene suddenly intensified. This was no longer just about the horse's strange behavior. It was about uncovering the truth, a truth that seemed to be buried in the past and one that might change everything. Jolene was about to step into a world she wasn't prepared for, one that would shake the foundation of everything she thought she knew about her fiancé, their future, and the life they had built together. As Jolene held the locket in her hands, she could feel that everything was about to change. The mysterious pain. The days following Jolene's discovery of the locket were filled with tension. The unease in her heart was growing, but she tried to push it aside. Ricky hadn't said anything about the locket, even after she brought it up that evening. Instead, he'd brushed it off with a half-hearted excuse about it being an old family heirloom, one he didn't want to talk about. He insisted it meant nothing, just a relic of his past that had no bearing on their present life. But Jolene couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. The way Keola had led her to the locket, as though it was a key to understanding something deeper, felt like a warning she couldn't ignore. As much as Jolene tried to keep a brave face, the mysterious pain in her back continued to worsen. It started as a dull ache, something she could manage with a few stretches or a change of position. But by the time she hit her 23rd week of pregnancy, it was something much more intense. The pain became constant, sharp, and unrelenting, especially when she tried to sit or stand for any length of time. It was as though something inside her was tightening and pulling, and no matter what she did, it wouldn't ease. Jolene decided to ignore it at first. She told herself that it was normal, that pregnancy could be uncomfortable, and every woman had to go through it. She had read plenty of books on pregnancy, and everything seemed to fit the typical symptoms. But as the days went on, the pain only grew more severe. She found herself unable to sleep through the night, tossing and turning in bed, unable to find a comfortable position. Even simple tasks like walking around the house or getting in and out of the car became agonizing. One evening, while preparing dinner, Jolene collapsed onto the kitchen floor, gasping in pain. Ricky rushed over, his eyes wide with concern. He had seen her grimace with pain before, but this was different. Jolene's face was pale, her hands trembling, and tears were brimming in her eyes. "Jolene! What's happening? Are you okay?" Ricky asked, his voice full of panic as he helped her up. I don't know, Ricky. It's getting worse," she whispered, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. "The pain, it won't stop." Without another word, Ricky scooped Jolene up in his arms and rushed her to the car. They had to get to the hospital. As they sped down the dark roads, Jolene tried to stay calm, but her mind raced with fear. Was it normal to have pain like this during pregnancy? She had heard of back pain being common, but this was something else entirely. As they arrived at the emergency room, Jolene was immediately taken in for a series of tests. Ricky stayed by her side, holding her hand tightly, but his worry was clear. He couldn't stop pacing the room, his mind reeling from everything that had been happening lately. What was going on with Jolene? Why was she experiencing this pain, and why had Keola been acting so strangely? The doctor, a woman named Dr. Harris, was kind but professional as she conducted an initial examination. She asked Jolene a series of questions, checking her vital signs and reviewing her pregnancy progress. After a few moments, Dr. Harris ordered an ultrasound to take a closer look at the baby and check if anything was amiss. Jolene lay on the examination table, the cold gel making her stomach tense as the technician moved the ultrasound wand over her belly. She glanced at Ricky, who sat beside her, his face drawn with worry. Jolene tried to comfort him with a small smile, but she could tell he was struggling. They had both imagined this moment differently, full of excitement and anticipation. But now, the tension in the room was palpable, and Jolene's heart was heavy with anxiety. After what seemed like an eternity, the ultrasound technician stepped away, leaving the room without a word. Jolene felt a surge of panic rise within her. What was going on? Why didn't the technician say anything? She glanced over at Ricky, who was now standing, his fists clenched by his sides. He had never looked more worried. Moments later, Dr. Harris returned to the room. Her face was neutral, but there was something about the way she carried herself that made Jolene's stomach twist with unease. "Jolene, Ricky, I need to talk to you," Dr. Harris said softly, her voice steady but serious. "There's something unusual in the ultrasound. I've called in a few specialists to take a look at the results, but I'm concerned. We need to take this very seriously." Jolene's heart skipped a beat. She could feel her blood run cold as she looked at Ricky, whose face had gone pale. "What do you mean, unusual?" Ricky asked, his voice tight with fear. Dr. Harris took a deep breath before answering. "There's something inside you, Jolene. Something abnormal. It's not just the pregnancy. It appears that something was inserted into your body at some point. We're not sure when or how it happened, but this isn't normal." Jolene's eyes widened in shock. "What do you mean inserted? What are you talking about?" Dr. Harris nodded grimly. "It's possible that you were implanted with something, perhaps even by someone you know. We need to run further tests to confirm exactly what it is and how it's affecting your pregnancy." Ricky was shaking his head in disbelief. "Implanted? How? Why? This doesn't make any sense." Jolene was in a daze, her mind struggling to process the information. Her pregnancy, which had once felt like a beautiful and hopeful time, now felt like a nightmare unraveling before her eyes. What did Dr. Harris mean by something inserted? Who would do that? And why? Jolene couldn't understand it. Her heart raced, and she could feel the cold sweat forming on the back of her neck. Dr. Harris gave them a moment to absorb the information. "I know this is a lot to take in, but we need to move quickly. I'm going to call in a team of specialists. In the meantime, I recommend that you stay here for observation. We need to ensure that you and the baby are safe." As Dr. Harris left the room, Jolene's mind spun. The pain in her back had grown worse, and now, The thought of something being inside her, something implanted without her knowledge, sent waves of nausea through her. "What does this mean, Ricky?" Jolene whispered, her voice breaking. "What's going on with me? What's happening to our baby?" Ricky, his hands trembling, reached for her and held her tightly. "I don't know, Jolene. But we're going to get through this together. I promise you. We'll figure it out. You and the baby are my priority, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect you." But as Jolene clung to him, she couldn't shake the feeling that their lives were about to take a dark turn, one that neither of them could have ever predicted. The mystery behind her pregnancy, the strange behavior of Keola, and now this secret implant, everything was connected in ways she couldn't yet understand, but she was certain that the answers were far more sinister than anything she could have imagined. And deep down, Jolene feared that the past Ricky had kept hidden from her might hold the key to unlocking the truth. But would she be ready to face it once it was revealed? Would their relationship survive whatever was lurking in the shadows of Ricky's past? The answers, she feared, would change everything. The police involvement. Jolene lay in the sterile hospital room, her mind reeling from the bombshell Dr. Harris had just dropped. She tried to focus on Ricky's comforting presence beside her, but her thoughts kept returning to the mysterious implant. What had been inserted into her body, and why? Was it a mistake? Or was someone intentionally causing harm? The tension in the air was palpable, and every passing minute seemed to stretch into eternity. Jolene's back pain was relentless, an agonizing constant that no amount of medication seemed to ease. She tried to distract herself by glancing at the window, watching the rain trickle down the glass, but her mind kept returning to the ultrasound and the unsettling news. Ricky, who had been pacing the room for the last hour, finally turned to her, his face pale with worry. He had been quiet ever since the doctor's revelation, his mind seemingly working overtime as he processed the situation. Jolene reached out for his hand, pulling him back to her side. "I'm scared, Ricky," she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "What if something is seriously wrong with me? What if it's too late?" He squeezed her hand, trying to reassure her. "We'll get through this, Jolene. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. I promise you that." But just as the words left his mouth, the door to the room opened, and 2 police officers entered. Jolene looked up, startled. She had expected the doctor or a nurse, not law enforcement. "Excuse us, Mr. and Mrs. Jonas," one officer said, his voice professional but firm. "We need to ask you a few questions regarding an ongoing investigation." Jolene's heart skipped a beat. An investigation? About what? The officer glanced at his partner before responding. "We're investigating a case connected to a possible illegal implant, and we need to know your whereabouts and any relevant details that could assist us." Ricky's jaw tightened, and he stood up to confront them. "What are you talking about? What does this have to do with us?" The officer remained calm, his expression unreadable. "We'll explain everything shortly. For now, we need to ask you both a few questions." Jolene exchanged a worried glance with Ricky. What did the police think was going on? They were still reeling from Dr. Harris's revelation, and now the authorities were involved. Was this some kind of mistake? Had Ricky's past finally caught up with them? Jolene tried to stay calm, but the fear she had been trying to suppress now bubbled to the surface. The officers asked a series of strange questions, ones that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. They wanted to know where Ricky had been in the last few days, who he had been with, and if he had any history with certain individuals. Some of the questions felt completely irrelevant to the situation, but the officers pressed on. Ricky's patience was wearing thin. "Why are you questioning us like this? We've done nothing wrong. All we want is to know if our baby is okay." The second officer spoke up. "We understand, but the investigation we're conducting is serious. It's about the implant in Mrs. Jonas. We need to know everything we can to help us move forward." The word implant echoed in Jolene's mind, and her anxiety spiked. Was this about the mysterious device that had been inserted into her body? Was it linked to some sort of criminal activity? Could Ricky have been involved in something she didn't know about? I don't know what you're talking about, Ricky said, his voice starting to shake. You need to tell me what's going on. This is our life, our baby we're talking about. The officers exchanged glances, then nodded. We'll need you both to come with us for further questioning. We've got a few more things to sort out. Before Jolene could respond, another officer entered the room, holding a file in his hand. He looked at the officers already present and then at Ricky. Sir, we need you to accompany us to the station immediately for further questioning. It's related to an ongoing investigation into your past. Ricky's face drained of color. My past, he repeated, his voice hoarse. Jolene could see the panic in his eyes. What are you talking about? I've done nothing wrong. The officer gestured for Ricky to follow him. We'll explain everything at the station. But we need you to come with us now. Jolene's heart pounded as Ricky stood frozen for a moment, looking at her. I'll be back, Jolene. I promise. Just stay here, and we'll figure this out. Tears filled Jolene's eyes as she watched Ricky leave with the officers. She felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness. Her entire world seemed to be falling apart. First, the mysterious implant, and now the police were involved. What was happening to their lives? She tried to steady her breathing, but the panic was suffocating. She had always been able to rely on Ricky, but now it seemed like even he had a past that he hadn't been willing to share. What had he hidden from her for so long? And why were the police investigating him now, of all times? As the minutes turned to hours, Jolene sat alone in the hospital room, feeling like a stranger in her own life. She kept hoping that Ricky would return with answers, but as the time dragged on, she grew more and more concerned. She had no idea where he was, what he was being questioned about, or what was going to happen next. Her thoughts were interrupted when Dr. Harris returned, accompanied by a nurse. The doctor looked at Jolene sympathetically. I'm afraid I have some more news for you, Jolene, Dr. Harris said softly. We've run additional tests, and we've identified the implant. It appears to be a tracking device, one that is often used for very specific and dangerous purposes. Jolene's blood ran cold. A tracking device? Who would do something like that to her? And why? Dr. Harris continued, her voice steady but concerned. We believe this may be linked to an underground operation. It's not a simple medical device. It's illegal and could have been inserted into your body without your knowledge or consent. Jolene struggled to comprehend what Dr. Harris was saying. You're saying, someone put this in me without my consent? The doctor nodded gravely. It's possible that it's linked to your husband's past. We've contacted the authorities, and they're investigating it further. But in the meantime, you're going to need to have this removed as soon as possible. It could be affecting your pregnancy and causing the pain you've been experiencing. Jolene's mind raced. Her hands trembled as she clutched the hospital gown tightly around her. Could Ricky really be involved in something like this? Had he lied to her all these years about his past? Before she could process everything, the door to the room opened again, and one of the police officers returned, his face grim. Mrs. Jonas, we need to speak with you. Your husband's situation is more complicated than we initially thought. Jolene's heart skipped a beat. What had they discovered? What was Ricky involved in, and how deep did this mystery go? She was about to find out whether she was ready for it or not. The truth revealed. The sterile hospital room felt suffocating as the officer stepped into the room, his eyes scanning Jolene with a mix of concern and curiosity. Jolene could feel her pulse racing. Her world had been turned upside down in the span of just a few hours, and now, it seemed like everything was unraveling faster than she could process. Mrs. Jonas, the officer said, his voice calm but firm, we need to speak with you about your husband's connection to an ongoing investigation. It's important that you understand the gravity of this situation. What we're about to tell you may be hard to hear. Jolene felt a wave of nausea sweep over her. What was happening to her life? Her mind flashed to Ricky, alone and likely confused, somewhere in the police station. He'd been taken away without an explanation, and now the police were talking about him in ways she didn't understand. She could feel her heart beating erratically in her chest. The officer continued, "We've uncovered information that ties your husband, Ricky, to an underground network, one that deals with illegal implants and trafficking. The device in your body is a part of this operation." Jolene's vision blurred as the officer's words sunk in. "Ricky," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "No, this doesn't make sense." He couldn't. The officer's expression softened, but his tone remained steady. "I understand that this is difficult, but the evidence is clear. Ricky's past is tied to a group that specializes in the illegal implantation of tracking devices in individuals. We believe you've become an unknowing victim in this operation." Jolene couldn't breathe. She shook her head, trying to force herself to process the words, but they felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Ricky, the man she had loved and trusted for years, was involved in something this sinister? She felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. "No," Jolene managed to say, her voice trembling. "This can't be true. Ricky would never do that. He's always been so kind to me. He's been my partner, my best friend." The officer hesitated before speaking again. "We understand that this is hard to accept. However, we have enough evidence to suggest that Ricky was not only aware of the operation but had been involved in orchestrating it in some way. His involvement goes back several years, and we believe it has something to do with your current situation." Jolene's thoughts spiraled. She could barely keep up with the information being thrown at her. Could Ricky really have been hiding such a dark side of himself for all these years? Had he been lying to her all along? And what did this mean for her pregnancy? What had the implant been placed in her body for? The officer seemed to sense Jolene's distress. "I'm not here to make accusations without proof, Mrs. Jonas. But you need to understand that we have found a link between Ricky's past and the group behind the implantation scheme. Your pregnancy is now part of an investigation that goes far beyond just your health. We need you to help us uncover the full truth." Jolene was drowning in confusion, unable to find any solid ground. She felt as if her world was collapsing around her. She had always believed that Ricky was her protector, her rock. And yet, now everything was being questioned. Was her entire relationship built on lies? "Where is Ricky now?" Jolene asked, her voice desperate, her hands clutching the sheets so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "What are you going to do to him?" The officer didn't answer immediately, and Jolene's anxiety skyrocketed. Her mind raced, thinking of all the worst possibilities. Was Ricky being arrested? Was he in danger? Could he be involved in something far darker than she could imagine? "He's at the station," the officer said slowly, as if testing the waters. "We're questioning him further. We've been able to confirm his ties to the group, but we need him to cooperate fully if we're going to stop the operation. He's facing serious charges, Mrs. Jonas." Jolene's stomach twisted with the weight of those words. The man she had loved for so long was facing serious charges. The man who had promised to protect her, who had shared every part of his life with her, was now a suspect in a criminal investigation. Jolene felt like everything she thought she knew was shattering into pieces. Her thoughts were interrupted when Dr. Harris entered the room again, her face a mixture of concern and determination. "Jolene, we've completed the initial tests on the implant. It's been confirmed that it's a device used for tracking people, specifically for illegal activities. It's highly sophisticated, and it's linked to a network that we've been monitoring for months. I know this is overwhelming, but we need to act quickly." Jolene could barely focus on the doctor's words. She was trying to digest everything that had happened, the shocking revelations about Ricky's involvement, the implant in her body, the police investigation, and the strange behavior of Keola. It was all coming at her too fast. The officer stepped forward again. "Jolene, we need your help. We need you to tell us everything you know about Ricky's past, about his friends, his associates. Anything that could help us break this case wide open." Jolene felt a surge of betrayal and disbelief. She had never imagined that Ricky had been involved in something so criminal. And yet, the more she thought about it, the more the pieces began to fall into place. Ricky's secretive nature, his reluctance to discuss his past, had all of that been part of a larger story? Was he hiding something more dangerous than she could have ever imagined? But despite her anger, her confusion, and her heartache, Jolene knew that she had to make a decision. Could she help the police? Could she cooperate with an investigation into the man she had married, the man she had loved, even if it meant risking everything? As much as she wanted to believe in Ricky's innocence, the evidence was mounting against him. She had to face the reality that the man she thought she knew so well was now a part of something far more dangerous and complex than she could have imagined. The officer, sensing her internal struggle, gave her a moment to collect herself before speaking again. "Jolene, this is bigger than just your husband. The network we're investigating is responsible for trafficking people, illegal surgeries, and implanting tracking devices. They've been operating in the shadows for years, and we're doing everything we can to shut them down. But we need your help." Jolene's mind raced. She knew she couldn't let fear paralyze her. The decision before her was not just about her and Ricky anymore, it was about bringing a criminal network to justice and protecting the future of her unborn child. She had to be strong, no matter how much the truth hurt. "I'll help," Jolene said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll do whatever it takes." The officer nodded solemnly. "Thank you, Mrs. Jonas. We'll guide you through the next steps. You're not alone in this." As the officer left the room, Jolene was left to process what had just happened. She had just made a choice that would change the course of her life forever. She didn't know if Ricky was guilty or if he had been coerced into something far darker than she could understand. But what she did know was that she had to stay strong, for herself, for Ricky, and for the child she carried. And as she sat there, surrounded by doctors, police officers, and the harsh reality of the situation, Jolene finally realized that her life and the life of her child would never be the same again. The decision. The days following the police investigation felt like a blur. Jolene had barely slept, her mind consumed by everything she had learned about Ricky's past. The shock of the revelations continued to reverberate through her, leaving her with a constant sense of unease. The more she thought about it, the more she felt trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. The man she had trusted, the man she had loved, was somehow tied to something far darker than she could have imagined. Ricky's absence from the hospital felt like a gaping hole in Jolene's life. He was still being questioned at the station, and despite her determination to remain strong, Jolene found herself unraveling bit by bit. She had asked the police to let her speak to him, to hear his side of the story, but the officers insisted that he needed to remain under their supervision until they had gathered all the information they needed. Jolene spent her time in the hospital room, staring at the sterile white walls, lost in thought. The pain in her back persisted, a constant reminder of the uncertainty that plagued her. She had made the decision to cooperate with the authorities, but it didn't feel like the right choice. Was it truly the best thing to do? Could she trust the police? Could she trust anyone anymore? Her thoughts were interrupted when Dr. Harris entered the room once more. She looked at Jolene with a mixture of concern and compassion, and for the first time, Jolene noticed a glimmer of hope in the doctor's eyes. "Jolene," Dr. Harris began gently, "we've received the results from the implant tests. The good news is that it's not causing immediate harm to the baby, and the device itself can be removed. However, we need to act quickly. The longer it stays in your body, the more potential for complications, especially given the fact that the device is a tracking implant. It was designed to monitor and potentially control, not just monitor your movements, but your physical state as well." Jolene blinked at her, trying to absorb the gravity of the situation. "So, it can control me?" Dr. Harris nodded gravely. "Yes, the technology behind it is more advanced than we first thought. We've done a deep analysis, and this isn't just some tracking device, it's a sophisticated tool that can manipulate certain aspects of your body, such as pain receptors, heart rate, and even hormone levels. The pain you're experiencing in your back might not just be from pregnancy. It could be a result of the device interfering with your body's natural processes. The longer it remains, the more dangerous it becomes." Jolene's breath hitched in her chest as the realization settled in. The pain, the strange behavior of Keola, the unsettling feeling that had plagued her since the beginning of her pregnancy, it was all connected to this implant. She could feel her mind spinning with the implications. Who would do this to her? Who would violate her body in such an invasive way? But what about the baby? Jolene asked, her voice trembling with fear. What if the device is harming my baby? Dr. Harris gave her a reassuring smile. We believe the device hasn't reached the baby yet. But the longer it stays, the more it could affect the pregnancy. It's imperative that we remove it as soon as possible. The procedure is relatively simple, but we need to make the decision quickly. The longer we wait, the higher the risk to both you and your baby. Jolene's mind swirled with fear and confusion. She didn't want to think about the possibility that something could be wrong with her child, but she knew that time was running out. She had to act, she had to protect the baby, no matter the cost. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore the other pressing issue, Ricky. He was still under investigation, and she had no idea where he was or what was happening to him. The thought of being left alone, not knowing whether the man she had spent the last decade with was guilty of something so horrible, made her feel like she was drowning. Dr. Harris seemed to sense her internal struggle. Jolene, I know this is a lot to take in. But you have to make a choice. You can't keep putting off the decision. The longer you wait, the more danger you put yourself and your baby in. The procedure to remove the implant is necessary. Jolene nodded slowly, her heart heavy with indecision. She had always thought she would be able to make decisions easily when it came to her health, but this was different. The layers of complexity in her life now felt insurmountable. There was no way she could move forward without first understanding what had happened to Ricky, and yet, every second she waited to make a decision about her own health put her baby in greater danger. Just as Jolene was about to respond, the door opened again. This time, it was the officer who had been working on Ricky's case. He stepped into the room, his face still carrying the weight of the ongoing investigation. Jolene's stomach dropped at the sight of him. Mrs. Jonas, I need to speak with you again, the officer said. His tone was serious, but there was something almost apologetic in his eyes. We've gathered more information, and we've learned something important about your husband's involvement in the operation. Jolene felt her heart race. What is it? Is he okay? Where is he? The officer hesitated for a moment before answering. Ricky is currently being held at the station for further questioning. But we've learned that he was more deeply involved in this operation than we originally thought. It appears he was working for a shadowy organization that specializes in illegal implantation and trafficking. He wasn't just a victim, he was an active participant. Jolene felt as if the room had spun around her. Ricky, the man she had loved and trusted, had been involved in something this terrible? He had willingly participated in something so cruel? The weight of the revelation was almost too much to bear. But you don't understand, the officer continued. Ricky's involvement was not voluntary. He was coerced into working for the group. He was manipulated, and his actions were motivated by fear for his own safety and for yours. Jolene's mind reeled. She didn't know what to believe anymore. Ricky had lied to her about his past, but did that mean he was guilty of everything the police were accusing him of? Was he the person she thought he was, or was he a victim too, trapped by circumstances beyond his control? I don't know what to believe anymore, Jolene admitted, her voice shaky. Ricky told me so many things, but I never knew this side of him. I don't know if he was involved in this willingly or if he was forced into it. But if he was part of this, I don't know how to live with that. The officer looked at her with understanding. I can't tell you what to believe, Mrs. Jonas. But we need to continue investigating Ricky's involvement. We're working to dismantle this network, and we believe that Ricky can be of great help in bringing them down. He's cooperating with us, but we need your assistance. Jolene felt as though her world had been shattered. She had been so sure of Ricky, so certain that they would face everything together. But now, she wasn't sure who he was anymore. She didn't know if he was the man who had loved her and shared their dreams of a family, or if he was someone entirely different, someone whose actions had brought them both into a world of danger. The officer's words hung heavy in the air. Jolene had a choice to make. She could stand by Ricky, help him fight to clear his name, or she could walk away, choosing to protect herself and her baby from the consequences of his actions. Either way, her life was never going to be the same. As she stared at the officer, her mind a storm of conflicting emotions, Jolene knew that she had to make a decision not just for herself, but for her unborn child. And whatever decision she made, she would have to live with it. But there was one thing she was certain of: the truth was out there, and she would stop at nothing to uncover it. She had to know the full story. Only then would she be able to make the decision that would shape her future and the future of her family. The aftermath. Jolene sat in the quiet of her hospital room, her mind in turmoil. Every piece of information that had come to light in the past days seemed to throw her further into confusion. She no longer knew who to trust or what the future held. Her heart ached as she thought of Ricky, the man she had believed in for years. Now, everything felt like a lie. Yet, despite everything, a part of her still couldn't shake the belief that he wasn't entirely at fault. Could it be possible that he had been manipulated? Was he a victim too, as the police officer had suggested? The officer's visit had left her with more questions than answers. Ricky's past, which he had kept so carefully hidden, was now laid bare in front of her, revealing the darkness that had haunted him for years. The fact that he had been coerced into working for a criminal network made Jolene's heart ache for him, even as she struggled to reconcile this version of him with the man she had loved. Could she ever forgive him for keeping such a monumental secret from her? Could their relationship survive the truth? Dr. Harris's words about the implant and its potential danger weighed heavily on her mind. The doctor had made it clear, the device in her body could no longer remain. It was causing physical harm, interfering with her pregnancy, and possibly controlling her pain and other bodily functions. Jolene's physical pain had become a constant companion, a reminder of how much was at stake. But now, with the decision to remove the implant looming, she had to think about the bigger picture, her baby, her future, and whether Ricky would be there to share it with her. The officer had told her that Ricky was cooperating with the investigation, but that didn't change the fact that he was still being held at the station, facing serious charges. Jolene felt the weight of his absence in the most profound way. As much as she wanted to be angry with him, as much as she wanted to walk away and protect herself from the betrayal, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of sorrow. She had married Ricky not just for his love, but for the man she thought he was. Now, she was faced with the painful reality that she didn't know him at all. The door to her room creaked open, interrupting her thoughts. Jolene looked up to see her mother, Mary, standing in the doorway. Her face was drawn with worry, and Jolene could see the exhaustion in her eyes. Her mother had been by her side through all of this, offering comfort and support when Jolene needed it most. "Jolene, honey, how are you holding up?" Mary asked, her voice gentle. Jolene wiped away a tear that had slipped down her cheek and gave her mother a small, forced smile. "I'm not sure, Mom. I'm not sure of anything anymore." Mary moved to sit beside her, taking Jolene's hand in hers. "I know this has been incredibly hard for you, but you have to remember, this isn't your fault. You didn't cause any of this. Ricky's past is his own burden to carry, not yours." Jolene nodded but couldn't bring herself to speak. She felt as though everything she had worked so hard to build, everything she had believed in, was slipping through her fingers. How could she keep moving forward when the person she trusted most had shattered that trust in such a monumental way? Her mother's voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. "Have you decided what you're going to do about the implant, honey? The doctor said it needs to come out, and the longer you wait, the more danger you're in. I know this isn't easy, but you have to make that decision for yourself and for the baby." Jolene squeezed her mother's hand, her gaze dropping to her swollen belly. The baby, her baby, was the only thing that mattered now. Despite all the pain, all the confusion, and the heartache, Jolene knew that she had to do whatever it took to protect her child. The implant, whatever its purpose, was a threat to that. "I have to do it," Jolene said quietly, her voice filled with determination. "The doctor's right. I can't let this continue. I need to get the implant removed, even if it's the hardest thing I've ever done." Mary's face softened with love and concern. You're stronger than you realize, Jolene. You've been through so much already. And no matter what happens with Ricky, you have to remember you're not alone in this. We'll get through this together, okay? Jolene nodded, the weight of her mother's words grounding her. She knew her next steps wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that she couldn't face the uncertainty of the situation without taking action. The longer she waited, the more at risk she put herself and her baby. She had to take control of her health, her body, and her future. Just as she was about to say something in response, the door opened once more. This time, it was a nurse, accompanied by a different officer. Jolene's heart skipped a beat, but it wasn't the same officer who had visited her earlier. Mrs. Jonas, I'm afraid we have some additional information we need to discuss with you, the officer said, his tone more serious than before. Jolene's anxiety spiked again. What is it? Is Ricky okay? The officer took a deep breath, his eyes flicking briefly to Mary before meeting Jolene's gaze. We've just received new developments in the investigation. It seems Ricky isn't the only person involved in this operation. There's someone much closer to home who has been helping orchestrate the implant scheme. Jolene's heart thudded painfully in her chest. What do you mean? Who else is involved? The officer hesitated for a moment before speaking again. Your mother, Mrs. Jonas, was linked to the group as well. We've found evidence that suggests she was working with them, knowingly or unknowingly, to facilitate the implantation process. Jolene's world seemed to stop. The room spun around her as she tried to process the words the officer had just spoken. Her mother? Was this some kind of joke? The woman who had raised her, who had been her rock through everything, was now being accused of being a part of the operation that had ruined her life? Mom, is this true? Jolene whispered, her voice shaking with disbelief. Mary, looking utterly shocked and confused, shook her head vehemently. No. No, honey, I have no idea what they're talking about. I've never been involved in anything like this. I swear to you, Jolene, I'm innocent. The officer remained silent, watching the exchange. Jolene's heart was torn in two. Was her mother lying? Or was she truly caught up in something she had no knowledge of? The idea that her mother could be involved in such a dark conspiracy shattered everything Jolene had ever believed about her. I don't understand, Jolene said, her voice breaking. How could you be involved in something like this, Mom? Mary's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. I swear, Jolene, I didn't know. I didn't know anything about the implant. If I had, I would have done everything I could to stop it. Please believe me. Jolene didn't know what to believe anymore. She felt like she was suffocating under the weight of the lies, the secrets, and the betrayal that surrounded her. She had to make sense of it all, but everything was so tangled that she didn't know where to start. The officer spoke again, his tone softer now. Mrs. Jonas, we need you to come with us. We'll need to ask you some questions regarding your possible involvement. This is a critical part of our investigation. Jolene's mind reeled. How could this be happening? Was her mother really a part of this operation? Was this all one big web of lies that had been spun around her without her even knowing? I need some time, Jolene said, her voice shaky. I need to think. I can't just process this all at once. The officer nodded, his expression sympathetic. I understand, Mrs. Jonas. Take the time you need. But please know, we'll be working hard to get to the bottom of this. We'll get the truth. As the officer left, Jolene was left in the silent aftermath of the bombshell that had just dropped. Everything she thought she knew about her life was being called into question. Her mother, her husband, the people she had trusted, now, they were all tangled up in a conspiracy that had been running behind the scenes, and she was stuck in the middle of it. Jolene took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The road ahead would be long, and it would be filled with hard decisions. But one thing was certain, she couldn't keep running from the truth. She had to face it, no matter how painful it was. And she would do it for her baby, for the future that was still within her grasp, even if everything else seemed to be falling apart.